All right, guys. So I am a recovering volume junkie, I'd say. Yeah, and I'm here to admit that today, that I think in many ways, what I was doing in the past was a bit excessive, and that Jeff Alberts was right all along, and that there's definitely things I think people can learn from this discussion. We're about to go into basically like over time, just getting your training to the point where you kind of know what is like moving the needle. I think this is applicable in other ways too. It's like, think about like the meal timing. Like we've all had these schedules before where we're eating like every 2 hours or something like that. And we feel like we have to do that in order to progress. And then eventually, I think has gotten to the point where I think there, more than anywhere else, like people are starting to really split things up into the variables that like make the most sense. Like it's not necessarily like this menu's like not effective, like this menu's better. It you know, comes down to calories, like what's your protein intake, protein timing, things like that, right? So over time, I think that's something I have seen with nutrition is people have learned to kind of simplify that a little bit. At least most of my incoming athletes, it seems like, hey, that's one thing they really have a good handle on. But when it comes to training, a little different there sometimes. Like I find myself more often than not, like having to like, hey, like, let's just remove this, and that, rather than, you know, they think they come in and I'm going to like add all these other things that they have to do now. And it's usually the other way around. So not just with myself, but with my athletes, especially incoming new athletes, athletes that on like Dirk, for example, like Dirk, he's been with me for like 7 years now, I think. And he'll tell you as well that, hey, you know, like programming 7 years ago versus like now, it's so different. Like we've definitely narrowed it down to like what is working. I feel good. And I think most importantly, it's like he feels like he can do this for a long time now.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I think as I've, you know, advanced in my training career, things have gotten more simple and time efficient, you know, and that's not just out of, you know, necessity. You know, the term like figuring out what's moving the needle and kind of dosing things appropriately. You know, my biggest, I guess, opinion of the kind of the volume movement that we've seen, you know, over the past decade or so. Like, yeah, we know volume is highly correlated to hypertrophy, but you know, it's the quality of that volume obviously matters. And I think when we look at resistance training studies to kind of guide our practice, we need to remind ourselves that like these are snapshots of time. Like this isn't an entire train. It's not, you know, even usually 6 months. I mean, usually they're 8 to 16 weeks or so. So looking at it from the perspective of longevity, like I would rather see somebody do a little bit less, stay healthy, not be burned out by it than, just kind of redline volume, get maybe better progress. And that is a maybe, in the short term, because I think you know, I know we've talked about this before, like injury is a very common bottleneck for people, you know, as they advance in their training career. And it's a lot more fun to train when you're not in pain. And I think managing your volume strategically makes, you know, a big difference on that front.
Yeah, we kind of know this like with a caloric deficit. Like it's like, yeah, you can go ahead and run 1,000 calorie deficit, and with that one, you will get better results. Like you will lose more fat over, you know, the short term, but long term, like we've seen that, you know, work against the person who's applying such methods.
Yeah, that's really good.
Something?
A lot of what I have an experience with lower volume is kind of more applicable to myself. You know what I mean? Because I see it firsthand, and I don't necessarily see how our clients train per se, you know, when we're talking about volume and we're talking about sets, because doing 15 sets of quarter squats a week is much different than doing 6 or 7 sets of like ass to grass squats a week. You know what I mean? And that's what we don't see. You know, we see, okay, yeah, this person thrives and does well doing 15 sets of squats a week, but we don't see them actually squat. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times we'll just kind of reluctantly kind of go along with it. And then, you know, we kind of are like, we don't really look like we're getting anywhere here. You know what I mean? And it's not until you kind of delve in and you start looking at lifts and things like that, things kind of start to make more sense. It's like, okay, you know what? If you were doing that many sets a week of full range, higher quality, you know, repetitions, you might feel a whole lot differently. And so I think that's kind of something, Brian, you were kind of talking about, you know, kind of like the evidence. Sometimes I think even the evidence kind of misses that. You know, we might have a study going over 20 trained lifters, but 10 of them, you know, might be kind of more so the pumpers and squeezers, and then 10 of them might be actually taking all of their sets closer to failure while still doing, you know, good quality repetitions. And sometimes that kind of will throw off, you know, the findings a little bit. And that's what we don't see, you know, a lot of times. So I think there's still a whole lot that needs to be uncovered, you know, with this whole volume debate. And, you know, it wouldn't really, to be honest with you, surprise me that when the, you know, 3rd edition of the muscle and strength training pyramids come out, if, you know, Eric doesn't find out even something more so that needs to be revised, you know.
I thought where you were going to go was your max OT days, because I think when we look at your timeline, like just you as a bodybuilder, like I think that's when you were the most muscular in a bodybuilding sort of way. Like when I look at 2008 Brad, actually I was just showing Cynthia, my girlfriend, like pictures of our Capital City Muscle Mayhem, and I was no, not that one. It was the silver and black. And I was like, dang, like he was jacked in all the places that a bodybuilder was jacked. And max OT, for those people who don't know, it's pretty minimalistic. Like it's not like, you know, Menser hit, but there's, I think on many days, less than 10 total working sets. And it's really, and obviously it encourages you to go to concentric failure, if I recall correctly. And there's this major emphasis on trying to just objectively perform better. Right? It's got its gaps, obviously, but it's pretty straightforward to run. And that's what you made a living off of, like during that portion of your career.
Yeah, for a long time. Now, we have to kind of also take into consideration that I was arguably a novice back then. So I think I could have progressed when we had more of the other boxes checked off. But you are right. Yeah. I mean, for the most part, you were only training body parts in the probably 7 to 12 set range per week, you know? And yeah, I mean, I found it very, very highly effective, you know, and obviously there was, like you said, some gaps that needed to be filled to even make it more effective. But yeah, I think that was just kind of a little preview of sets and effort. You know what I mean? Taking each set pretty good quality, and getting rid of a lot of the fluff.
I remember it was an intervention plan for me that did its job, because as a teenager, I remember picking up Arnold's encyclopedia. I didn't want to buy the damn thing because it was out of my budget at the time. So I had this weekend gig, and during my lunch break, I'd go to the bookstore. I think it was like a Borders or something. And I would just, you know, collect some information, right? Like I'm applying that this week. And by the time I found I was about like 19, like my training sessions look very Arnold-esque. Like 3-4 hours of training. So, but then there was this max OT thing going around, and a lot of the athletes that the system promoted were drug free. So I was like, and so I'm like, you know what, I need to give this a try. And I gave it a fair try. I remember I ran it for like 6 months, and I'm pretty proud in hindsight because I remember the way my personal chest day was put together. It was in 2 sets of flat dumbbell, 2 sets of incline, and then I think I had 2 sets of tricep, and then that was it. It's like go home. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first day I ran it, it was really hard to go home. I was like, that's it. But like this could have been done a little bit better. Like, that third rep on that dumbbell press, I didn't like. So it did get me thinking in the right manner. Like I committed to it. And since I knew I had only so much work, I really did my best to, especially at 19, man, like you can't focus on anything at that age for too long, but it really got me to like zero in on what it is that we're here to do. You don't have until next week to do this again, not optimal again, especially with that amount of volume. But yeah, I remember it fixed some things for sure. And at the end, I slowly started gravitating more towards like the other direction because like soon after, a lot of what was being echoed was like, like volume is like pretty directly correlated to muscle growth. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to, leave anything on the table. So I slowly kind of in segments went back to my old way. But at the time, it really fixed up a few things. Like I was very picky about my movements. I was very picky about how they were executed. And I was focused on objective measures more so than ever before. So, yeah, it was a solid program for myself at that point in time. And I think for you, Brad, you might have started that program as a novice, but by the time I saw you, like you were a pretty advanced bodybuilder, I'd say. You're like on the cusp of like diving into the advanced world. So it did get you pretty far. So it works. It works. There's a lot of things wrong with that program. There's probably better ways to go about it. And maybe at the end of this, we can give people some general recommendations, but a lot of people have grown quite well from lower volume programs.
Yeah. I have a similar kind of background as Brad there, probably similar stages
dog crap.
Yeah, dog crap training.
DC, yes.
And I've probably talked about this before, but it's, I think, I'd been training for a few years at that point, but, a lot of stuff just lacked intent, probably. It's like, let's just get the work in and be on my way. And you're rewarded for it because of your training status, but obviously that doesn't continue forever. But yeah, I remember like it was like a rotating schedule. I think I'd train, had like 3 upper body sessions and you just kind of rotated through them. But it was like a rest pause set for each muscle group. And if I recall, maybe it was just 1. But I remember like you do like 6, you pick like a 12 RM or something, or not a 12 RM, like a 6 to 8 RM. Go to failure, rest, and just do it until you got to 12 reps. And then you would increase weight. So it was extremely low volume. But I think what it, like you said, Berto, and it just sort of taught me kind of how important the time is that we do have in the gym. And, carrying that intent over to, higher volume programs, there's a benefit there. And I know, from years powerlifting, I think the same thing is true. I mean, we were talking a little bit, before the call, it's, getting underneath a bar to squat anything over like, 80%, like you have to be focused. And, usually on average, those programs, are a little bit lower in volume, as intensity is ramped up a bit, but, that intent and attention to detail, like you can see a lot of, I feel like I can notice when somebody has like a strength training background once they come over to bodybuilding, it does seem to benefit them both in terms of, understanding the importance of improving performance over time, but also like the the attention that they bring into each set and knowing how to push to a reasonable proximity to failure. But, you know, like you, Berto, I then, you know, the message of more volume came about, and yeah, it's kind of like you revert to, over time, somewhat of where you started. And I think that's, you know, I'm not doing DC training or rest pause, but my volume is, you know, probably 2/3 of where it was, you know, 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's benefited me.
Sometimes I will, I probably shouldn't divulge too many client secrets, but sometimes I can trick people into, seeing the light, you know, when it comes to, a lower volume training. I'll kind of like throw in a deload in there, and I'll say, okay, you know what, we're going to take all these sets that are, you know, 15 sets a week, and we're just going to cut it in half. I want you to do 8 sets. And so, you know, the program just basically looks like 50%. I said, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to put on there, you know, basically an 8 rep max. And I want you to take that, you know, to where both sets, because a lot of times you end up, you're doing 2 sets instead of 4 sets. I want to take both sets to where, you know, you better get a spotter on the next one. And I want all of your sets very consistent. I want them all to look, you know, all of your reps, I want them to look like mirror images and like duplicates of the one before it. And they find at the end of a week like that, you know, they don't feel deloaded. And I'm like, well, maybe we should just do that again then. So we run a second week of it, you know, and they're like, you know, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Okay, well, in that case, let's run a true deload. You know, you take the week off, or, you know, just do your bodybuilding movements, and then we'll go back and we'll do that same thing again. And they start to realize, number one, they're not really taking their sets as close to failure as they think they are. Oftentimes it's just, you know, cheating. You know, they when one rep slows down and then the next 3 reps are faster, that wasn't, you know, by accident. You didn't all of a sudden just get a shot of nitrous oxide there, you know. You're using a little bit more momentum, you're cutting the range of motion down, you know. So yeah, just sometimes I'll trick people into like getting more efficient, you know, with their time. And really, to be honest with you, we don't have to look far to know what efficiency looks like. You know, we look at Jeff, you know, and every one of those repetitions are high effort. And I've found, since kind of coming to that conclusion, I cannot do some of the volume that a lot of notable people, you know, kind of profess and program. You know, I am wasted at the end of one session doing some of those sets when you're, you know, basically every repetition counts. And Berto, I know that's something that you've kind of really talked about in your prep, is managing supply and demand and making sure that every one of those reps kind of matches the supply that you're giving it. And I kind of wanted to ask you this for a while, so I guess now it's like the perfect time to do that. What kind of brought you to that conclusion, or what was the driving thing that brought you to that epiphany?
Well, first of all, I was looking for an old article where it was my volume at its worst. Like, it was a 2006 article, and what I was doing was ridiculous. I was gonna see if I can find the leg day, but I'm pretty sure. And it was a push pull. No, it was lower push pull is how I ran it. Rest legs. I was doing this twice a week, and I think we started with squats. We did some leg pressing afterwards, even some hack squatting. And then I know at some point some Bulgarian split squats found their way on there too. And then some leg extensions, some leg curls, some calves. Sometimes if I felt my squats sucked, I'd go back and like redo the squats. Like it was one of those deals. And you know, it worked because I remember, you know, as I added more things, it's like, oh, I'm seeing the changes. But in hindsight, I can look back and like, just from like my perspective at the time, just imagine myself doing the movements, what they felt like. I'm like, wow, that was like all over the place. Like, of course you were, because, you know, your sets just got worse as you loaded up the leg press heavier. And same thing with the squat. I remember it's embarrassing to look back on, but in one of my leg extension sequences in an old journal that I have somewhere online, it was the same weight on the leg extension. One set was 20, one set was 15, one set was 20, one set was... I was like, what are you even doing? Just terrible. But as I added more, because the work was so shitty, you know, via my own execution mostly, how close to failure maybe I was, because, you know, back of your mind, like when I was doing max OT, like I couldn't protect myself. Like it was just like, okay, you got 2 sets of this flat dumbbell press. And my thing was always like, I can convince myself to do something really stupid twice. You know, like first time you're like, ooh, that's crazy. Okay, you only got to do it one more time and you're good. But when you have 5 sets of squats or leg pressing, and often it was like 5 sets seemed like a reasonable number to me at the time. You're kind of protecting yourself, and you're like not really like going there on purpose. And more than anything, I remember I wanted the progress to show up, like, because I'd fill up these journals online. Like I wanted it to show there. When like, dude, progress is like, maybe you could have hit the same weight, but maybe the RPEs were low, maybe the form was better. So I didn't quite understand that just yet. So that's where we ended up. And I think what kind of corrected things for me a little bit the first time was the first time I prepped. It was a bad dietary approach, but I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, I can't do everything that I do to put on muscle when I am dieting for a show. So that was kind of a hint. I didn't really pay too much attention to it. I just kind of thought it wasn't tough enough was where I went with that. I just didn't have the grit. But more recent times, yeah, I guess I realized I want to do this for a long time. And when it comes to how I approach all things on the nutritional side, it's like there's very little wasted motion there. It's like I don't waste my time on bullshit that's like not getting me to where I want to go. And it's generally, honestly, it's by narrowing down those variables, it's improved the results I get. But then also it's just made everything else in life so much better. Like when I think of it, like especially back when I was doing like 7 meals a day, and I swear to you, on a 7 meals a day format, there was a span where I went 3 years without missing a scheduled meal, and I was very proud of that fact. But totally unnecessary.
Your metabolism must have been a furnace.
I was on fire, bro. I was a redhead at the time. Yeah. It was crazy that I was doing all that. It was admirable. Like I do think there's something to the boot camp element of trying to figure things out as a bodybuilder. But eventually, like, you know, to get beyond a certain place, it's like I figured out, hey, I have to count my calories. It can't just be like I'm eating these really good foods all the time, you know. So with the training, it was kind of that. It's like, okay, I don't feel as good as I should physically when it comes to my joints. I want to do this for like a really, really long time and at a really, really high level. So yeah, a lot of it was just being open to having an inventory check of what it was that I was doing, and just trying to clean that up much in the same way that, hey, a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, have done with their nutrition over the years. So yeah, it was, but here's the thing. It was mostly the focus on the long term. It's like, okay, I don't care necessarily about what I can get over these next 2-3 months. It's like, shoot, like if in 20 years, like I can still be lifting in a way that kind of resembles like what we're doing now. And for me, a big inspiration was like powerlifters, like for example, like Dave Ricks, right? Because our sport, when you think about it, it should lend to longevity a little bit more than like what a barbell allows for in most cases. So I'm like, fuck, I should be able to Romanian deadlift like 500 pounds when I am like pushing 60. Like, there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case. So yeah, a lot of it was because I was concerned about the long term, and like anything else, it's like you don't achieve great things by because of what you do in a month or half a year. It's you look at people in any sector, like they've achieved great things because they do a lot of the remedial tasks, like just really freaking well and consistently, like all the time for years on end. So yeah, with my training, I needed me some of that basically, and we figured it out. And this whole prep, it is about 8 sets per body part that I've been running. And honestly, I think once I start eating more, it's still going to work because my recovery abilities are going to do this.
Yeah, I like the kind of the analogy with nutrition, because it seems like anywhere you look, like on Instagram, like the prevailing message, within the evidence-based side of things seems to be, all of these details like don't matter if the program's not sustainable, and so, that's the foundation of the pyramid. So it seems kind of ironic, for that same message to not be as prominent on the training side of things. Because you're right, like that's sort of been the longevity aspect is big. And I think it's one of those things, like if I would have heard this message when I was 22 years old, like I'm not sure it would have swayed me to using lower volume, so I can empathize with that. But it is one of those things you kind of discover as you do get a little bit older. If you want to be training for a long time, and I think we're kind of in a unique position because, the barbell movements were, I think, more popular for bodybuilders, when we were, earlier in our training careers. And, some of those movements aren't well suited for longevity, like sometimes shoulders can take a beating with barbell bench. And I think, perhaps having more conducive exercise selection early in a training career could let you make better use of higher volumes, early on, and maybe not put you in a position where you have to dial back as much as you get older. But, one of my, Berto, talking about your prep, and even over the past like 2 years, and I think this is true for both of us, is the exercise selection and intent behind execution has, I think, increased significantly. And, I think, I was talking to Eric about this a while back, and, your back development. And I think exercise selection has helped bring that up. But I think just you have more intensity to your training now, if you want to use that term, and like attention to execution than I think you did in the years past. And I think that alone has allowed you to get away with a little bit less, and arguably with more efficient exercises to target the areas that you're trying to hit. And so that I do, while I feel like it can be pushed to extremes, I do kind of appreciate the resurgence of the importance of exercise selection on, making the most out of your time in the gym. And, because when you can use the right tool for the job, your time spent doing the work is going to go down.
Well, I love too that, Berto's not a beginner. He's not even a novice, and here he's like you said, Brian, he's made, better, he's chosen better tools for the job. The volumes come down, and you can see it on his physique. And to me, that alone should be very, very convincing. But that's kind of the luxury that we're in. We get to see this revolving door of people. And a lot of times they work their way out and we don't see them for a while, and then they work their way back in. And those that kind of stick to the principles that we're kind of professing here, we get to see that same effect on a lot of people. Not very often do we get to see somebody's 10-year career, but we do have the luxury of seeing them, for 2 years here, and then we don't see them for 2 years, and then they come back 2 years later, and we get to see this revolving door of people coming through. And I know I've seen it many, many times. It's like, you just think about what you used to do, before we started working together, and now here, you're doing like half of that, and you can actually see it on the physique. I mean, sometimes I've seen it in the short time that I've been coaching somebody, over the course of like 2-3 years. They were doing all this volume. I reluctantly kind of let them do that for a while, As soon as we drop that volume down, get some videos of their lifts, work on the execution of those lifts, and make those lifts a little bit more higher quality. It seems like in a matter of months, we can see the changes, And if I was to go back in time and talk to the 22-year-old Brian, trying to convince him, I'd say, look at these examples,
Yeah. Yeah.
That should sway you a little bit,
Yeah, it should. It should. I think it's just it just takes maturity to not want things right now. And I think that's kind of the trap people get into. And you see this a lot, we were talking about powerlifting, like a lot of junior lifters, because they're, about to age out of the junior division, they tend to, if they're on the cusp of like a podium spot, and they're a highly competitive lifter, like some of them do some reckless shit, and it's for the intent of like, okay, and whether they realize it or not, it's like, this isn't a sustainable approach, but like, I get it. Like at that age, if you're in that position, which, few people are, like there's a time and a place for it. Like, I don't think the message that we're trying to give is like low volume from day one. It's just over time, your ability to get more out of less, I think, tends to increase as you kind of gain additional self-awareness in your training.
Hey 3DMJers, Andrea Valdez here to tell you all about the Lifting Library 6.0, our latest update to our flagship video course in the 3DMJ Vault. The Lifting Library is our all-in-one educational solution to perfecting the essential movements and exercises that every bodybuilder needs to know and execute well. We just released new videos yesterday, and the course now includes a total of 42 chapters, covering every classic barbell and dumbbell lift, loads of body weight and machine exercises, warm-ups, BFR training, and even a downloadable PDF chapter on how to build a program. Each of those exercise chapters has a super detailed instructional video with multiple angles, freeze frames with graphics, and educational voiceovers by our Chief Science Officer, Eric Helms. Each one also has a text-based supplemental section that outlines those key performance takeaways, and most importantly, a programming considerations section, which tells you exactly how each lift should fit into a program based on your physique and goals. This new batch of learning chapters that we just released includes further deadlift variations, leg extension variations, overhead press variations, rear delt rows, direct trap work, and cable crunches. If you already have access to the Lifting Library because you're already a Vault VIP member, go to your dashboard at 3dmjvault.com and check out the new videos that are there waiting for you at no extra cost. But if you don't already have the Lifting Library, now is the time to sign up for our Vault VIP membership to get access to all of this and our other 16 courses, because we plan on increasing that subscription price from $12.99 per month to $16.99 per month in early 2023. The annual price will also go up from $69.99 to $79.99 per year. We haven't had a price increase for over 14 months, and since then we've added 4 new courses and 4 other major course updates. So just keep that in mind, that once you become a member, you lock in that lower price point while we continue to add more content to your learning dashboard over time. You can sign up and claim your lower membership price at 3dmjvault.com. Again, that's 3dmjvault.com. VIP members will also get access to the Advanced Deload Guide, the Calculating Your Calories course, the Sustainable Fat Loss course, our Injury Prevention and Management Q&A collection, the Lagging Body Parts course, and many, many more. Go to 3DMJ Vault and sign yourself up today. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the show.
The issue is that a lot of people don't have the access to us still. Like that's like if there's not a whole lot of 20-year-olds like in the grand scheme that like know who Jeff Alberts is, and the fact that he looks the way he does, training like, and that was actually a big realization for myself. I'm like, okay, Jeff's kind of beat up. Like I have so much more mileage on my body. Like, what's it going to look like when I get to his age? You know. But I think for a lot of young people, they just need to see the examples, because it's very different. Like when I remember, being in my early 20s, and it was always like these dudes around my age now that would come up to me and they're like, well, when you get to be my age, like, or, they'd tell me about what they used to do. And it's really hard to take that seriously. Like you feel like they're just trying to discourage you because you're doing so much better than they are. But it does hit different when it's one of the reasons that, hey, I do try to get that out there, because it's like, hey, look, like I progressed like in my 30s, in my late 30s. And here's some things that maybe you should consider and you should like think about. So yeah, I do think it's like, why not, man? Like learn from other people's errors, because I mean, we went through some stuff like speaking of powerlifting, like Generation 1 DUP, like holy crap, like that was something else.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want people to like take it too literal to the point where it's like, I'm gonna go look up this Max OT thing, and and I'm gonna start Max OT tomorrow. Like that's not what I'm saying either. But I do think, just like, again, most people, when it comes to the nutrition, I think nutrition's easy because, man, like it when you mess up on that end, like it leaks into other parts of life like quite rapidly. But when it comes to training, like I get to see the sample size at my gym. It's like there's a lot of people who are doing like relatively well. They look quite good. They're like jacked. They're muscular, especially my gym, bodybuilding gym. But when I see what they're doing, I'm like, okay, so that's not really doing much for you, but this is what's actually driving things. This one you could do a little bit better. And, at the end, it's like I can probably take their workout and like remove 2 leg press variations a week or something like that, and they would be getting probably the same results, maybe a little bit better, and they'd be less likely to run into that bottleneck that it's usually the case. It's like something just hurts to the point where we really can't train around it for extended periods of time.
I love that you kind of keep going back to that nutritional point too, because that is so important to progress, right? I mean, how many times have we starved people to get them up on the bodybuilding stage, got them really lean, and then just didn't even run a program for the 2 weeks after? We just say, I just want you to go to the gym and have fun, just do whatever for a couple of weeks, and they just go to the gym and they're not even doing exercises that they're very familiar with, and they're eating again, and they put that weight on, and sometimes it's really good weight that we will see them put on, and it just kind of goes to show you that when you're eating, I almost feel like you can get away with less, because the material is there for you to actually build. I mean, that's the sport we're in, is bodybuilding, right? When you've got the raw material there, I feel like you can get away with less. And then, of course, when you have good technique and good quality repetitions, it's kind of like it almost kind of makes up the difference in a way. But yeah, I feel like that's something that is really overlooked as well, is that when you're eating in a surplus, I mean, obviously the bigger the better, but we are in an aesthetic sport. We can't just grow into our sumo wrestler friends. But nonetheless, if we're in a surplus, it can be minimal, and you can it seems like you can get away with less. And then, of course, you get that devil's advocate in there saying, well, if I'm eating, I should be doing more volume. I could actually drive down the road at 65 miles an hour instead of 55 if I'm doing that, more volume. But there's always that wheel spin that happens in there too. You're revving the engine and spinning the wheels, but you're really not going anywhere. And that's kind of goes back around to that efficiency. But I love that you keep going back to that nutritional, advice there, that standpoint.
Another thing, speaking to efficiency and just like the cost of additional volume. I looked this up, so I got it right here. But so in one of Schoenfeld's meta-analyses looking at different volume amounts, there's greater, this is where a big part of the prevailing message of, more volume tends to be, to a point, better for hypertrophy. But I think what a lot of people may not even realize is that there's a significant, it's not a linear relationship. Like doing 10 sets for a muscle group isn't going to get you twice the progress as doing 5. And that's actually exactly what they looked at. They had, I think, one group that was doing, or like a group of studies where they were doing less than 5 sets per week and then 10 sets per week. And the 10 set group gained, I think, it was like 35-ish% more muscle than the five set group. So it was 5 or less. Keep that in mind too. So it's like that's 100% increase in volume for 36% more return. And then you consider like most people that are probably listening to this are already approaching double digits or past it for volume. So that relationship likely only continues to taper off, so like if from a longevity perspective you can do 2/3 of what you want, like you could be getting those first few sets are like where you're getting the bulk of the stimulus, and so anything after that is less return, but it also comes at an additional cost in terms of wear and tear. So I think you have to consider those in conjunction when you're thinking about running high volume programs. Is like, okay, I could be like from the fatigue aspect, impacting downstream performance by doing this. And it's not giving me as much return as maybe I thought.
I think, so one thing I voiced is that post this, and it's just to, improve the quality of my life more than anything. After the season's over, which is in less than 2 weeks now, I plan on training 3 days a week. And I have so much confidence in like what it is, what's actually the main drivers of my progress that I'm like, I can make that work. But also what it does, because everyone's kind of unbalanced in some way. It's going to let me focus on other things as well. Because I'm, I want to rest up a little bit, but at the same time, it's like, hey, I also want to spend those 8 weeks or whatever, heading in the right general direction, at least building some momentum. But it's going to give me a chance to work on other things that also contribute to lifting. For example, like I've realized how important sleep is and how poor of a sleeper I am, like during this prep. And your body's so transparent when you are dieting that, like, if I get 5 hours of sleep, it's like, oh boy, like it feels like I'm dieting. If I get over 8, it's like, whoa, like this is the hack right here. And I imagine just like, like my volume the first time I prepped, where I'm like, man, this is excessive. I can't keep up with this. Like it did the exact same thing. It just made me realize like what things I'm kind of missing out on. So it's going to let me focus on other things like, hey, stress management. Let me better organize my life so that my stress comes down a little bit. Let me work on the sleep. There's some nutritional things that I want to work on. Like I definitely don't want to, this is the me thing, drink as much this off season, for example, things like that it's like, okay, less training is going to have me almost force me to focus on these other things that sometimes like people don't get it. It's like, okay, my training's not yielding the results I want. Let me do more, because that makes me feel proactive, when it's like, man, you have a host of these other things that if you would work on, they would definitely probably push your training in the right direction. So I think way too often that's the issue. Is like people look at the solution to breaking a plateau. It's like, let me do more. When again, it's like, hey, let's look through everything you're doing. Let's see if there's anything we can change there. And the stuff that takes place outside the gym. I think sometimes people really, because they have this kick-ass program, like they're like, well, that almost like doesn't matter. I know for me, when I was in my early 20s and running these 40 plus set leg days. Like, never once did I think that like maybe I'm progressing, because like, bro, it's like, like Friday through Monday, you sleep like 3-4 hours or something like that.
Well, and what you've kind of found out through contest prep, Berto, is similar to what you experience with age. Because I've kind of found in somewhat very abrupt results, I guess you might say, is, when you talk about sleep, I've been trying. I always felt like I slept pretty good, until I saw you were sharing your sleep score, that your very same Fitbit that you have, to the masses. And I was like, holy crap, I'm not getting that kind of a sleep score. And he's running contest prep, And sure enough, I focus on some little things that actually improve my sleep score and bring the weekly average up. And I'm feeling a little bit better, and I'm actually performing a little bit better in the gym. Water is another one. Like just the other day, I just kind of spaced it. I had to shovel some snow and I didn't get my water in. And I went in there and deadlifted. And I swear I strained or pulled or snapped something in my forearm just putting the bar back on the rack. You know what I mean? And I was like, damn, why did that happen? And I kind of thought about it and I'm like, shit, I've had 2 cups of coffee today and that's really it. I haven't had any hydration at all. Started focusing on that a little bit more often. And all my sessions have been really a whole lot better. The body's feeling better, stress management, like you said, it's amazing that little Fitbit kind of can use your heart rate to kind of gauge your stress levels. And I've been kind of paying attention to that too. This kind of stuff I never had to pay attention to, even like 10 or 15 years ago, but now if it seems like if one of those things is off a little bit, I can feel it. I can kind of feel it in my training. I can feel it kind of overlap into other things like my mood, and they all kind of start intertwining. And that's one of the things that I've really kind of learned to choose my shots in a way. You know what I mean? If I got to train today, you know what? Stress is kind of high. The sleep was not very good. I might purposely dial that volume back a little bit. And I give myself a range on a lot of stuff. It's kind of like you're going to do 1 to 2 sets. Well, today's a 1-set day. You know what I mean? A couple of different exercises. You're going to do 2 or 3 sets. Well, this is a 2-set day. I'll let myself kind of have my volume dwindle down for that, that one particular session. Because it's one session, out of, I track a lot of weird shit because I'm such a data geek, It's one session out of like anywhere between 198 and 210 that I'm going to get this year, So I'm okay with that, and yeah, that's kind of when you brought up all the things that you have to pay attention to. I've kind of found out now that I'm over that half-century mark, all that stuff I really got to pay attention to, and give myself the leeway, to adjust when the ducks aren't all in alignment.
See, my response to that, like 15 years ago, would have been like, shoot, like since I feel this way and the quality of the work is like not so great today, like in a frenzy, I'd panic and I'd do something that's not even in my program. Let me make up for this. And that's what I would do acutely, but also like long term, it's like, okay, we're kind of stalling here. And what would have fixed things up? It's like, hey, let me clean up my dumbbell press and make them look the same regardless of the load. That would have been much better than like, you know what, I'm gonna add that hammer strength decline press because I don't do it. Like that was running the machines was like usually that was the only tool I knew basically, So, and again, I see it at the gym, like all the time. Like, it's just like, man, it's like, I admire the work ethic, like, but I think you've gone enough from like this bodybuilding boot camp phase. Like, let's really start to like narrow it down. Cause seriously, like at this point it has, like I've seen people come and go from like the fitness industry. Speaking of adherence, like for a number of reasons, they burn themselves out just because they think this is what bodybuilding has to look like, or they've just like smashed their joints into dust, basically. But there's a lot of people that I can think back to like 10 years ago that were part of my lifting community, and they don't even do it anymore. And again, a lot of it is because they don't want to think long term. It's very similar to investing. It's like, hey, maybe there's like these strategies that like this is a well carved out path. Like many people have found success by putting the majority of their income like in this sector and over here. But instead they're like, you know what, this weed stock, it's gonna blow up to like 4 times what it is right now this month, and they end up going in the negative. So yeah, like especially when you're young, man, like the longer you can start thinking of like the long term, you're gonna be much better off than you will be like if instead of just being kind of infatuated in like what you can like do this year, what you can post in Instagram like during this workout. It's like if you really like look around, it's like, man, like anyone who's, especially on the drug-free side, anyone who's been successful for a long time, when you look at their approach, that's usually what they had in mind. It's like, okay, like what can I do in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? And in like my case, like I'm getting to the point where it's like, I want to be on stage and I want to be relatively similar to like what I am right now. Is I'm approaching 60. The big part of that is because I think the message that gets across, I think that's really important.
So what you're saying, Berto, is like the people that run Smolov are also more at risk of buying NFTs.
Smolov was like, I remember we framed it as like, it was like the crash diving.
Yeah, I remember you said
of powerlifters.
I got to be able to squat 500 on my cruise next month.
It's Smolov. Oh my gosh. I killed myself running like an introductory program of Smolov.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good example. It's like, in those phases, just picking the thing. I mean, the sales message for that program is like increase your squat, 40 to 50 pounds in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. And it's like, sign me up. And then you're just absolutely like buckled by the end of it. You're just like, okay, I need to take a week, 2 weeks and just let my body recover from this. And then, I mean, you're paying the price by the end of it. And so, yeah, I think most people now kind of realize that you're able to, well, not everybody, but a lot of people realize you're able to go at what may be, 80% of what your full capacity of effort is and actually sustain it. Yeah. And like you said, any successful, like the bodybuilders that have been doing this for decades, there's a reason they're still in the game. And I think a big part of that too is just enjoyment. Like I notice for me, like if I write my own training and I mean, I'm still susceptible to doing this, like biting off more than I can chew sometimes. And it's not that I don't make progress on the program. Like I eventually sort of default into what is sustainable, but I think just that sense of like, okay, did I meet my own expectations of executing this program? Like I'd be better off just programming the lower amount of volume to begin with and not feeling like I fell short, So I think the psychological aspect of it is big. And, I would encourage anybody, if you that's listening to this, if you're running a high volume program, to maybe, spend 2 weeks, cut your volume, in half, or, maybe only do 2 sets per exercise, and just like try to objectively evaluate like where your intent is, heading into each set. It doesn't mean you have to train to failure on those 2 sets, but is the way you're approaching the work different by just simply by that change? And I think for me, sometimes, like Berto, you were talking about 5 sets, on a movement, and like the difference between going from 3 to 4 for me, that's kind of like the threshold where I'm like, 4 sets is kind of a pain in the ass. Like I would be much happier and feel better just only having to do 3. And obviously there's times where I still do it. I still do it a lot of the time, but just that, I think just in terms of motivation and that hunger to keep coming back into the gym, like if you're blasting volume, that's going to wane pretty quickly.
Yeah. Cause just like Berto was talking about, getting on stage when he's like 60, I don't know if I have the same aspirations as him on the bodybuilding, competitive front, but I want to be lifting when I'm 60, 65, 70.
Least, yeah.
I mean, shoot, I would be totally content with just like, being in the gym on a Friday and then, Sunday, Monday, I go into the hospital and have a heart attack and die, I would be totally okay with that, 'cause yeah, I do want to just, I don't know. It's just that empowered, confident feeling of being strong, and you can't fake it, regardless of how you look, you can't just go into a gym, plop yourself under 250, 300 pounds and move it regardless of your age, unless you do it, unless you work at it. You can't fake that, you know what I mean? And so that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going too, is I want to do this right up until the week that God takes me, I really do. And the only way I'm going to do that is if I don't grind myself into the dust and, program things for me that I can't sustain over time, Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. It's just that I guess my stage will be my little 4 walls over there, in the front of the house.
Yeah. So I guess at the end, it's not just about the volume and your training, but it's like figure out the most efficient way to get your bodybuilding done. Because like I said, man, like in all sectors, like what is this person's secret? Like they just kept on doing it more than anything, even if it was a 7 out of 10 business plan. They just were able to, continually like keep going. And for the majority of people out there, like that is what's going to unlock, the physique that you want. Because, I think especially with our Skype program, like, I get to meet new athletes and the biggest issue across the board. And I think if most people are being perfectly honest with themselves, it's just like consistency. Like, have you been able to, most people haven't put together a consistent year when it comes to both their training and nutrition. And we do it for a year eventually, and they're like, wow, that wasn't as hard to sustain. It didn't seem as impactful in the short term. Like I didn't feel as proactive. But here I am a year later, and it's like, this is the most progress I've ever made. And that's a good feeling to kind of, in a way, I think when you're presented with the idea, you're kind of defensive that time is a great equalizer. But, once you see it work for you, you're like, oh, okay, like, shoot, that's really what it is about. It's like, okay, have some plan that's sensible that I can adhere to, that is being done right, and just do it for a long ass time. And you're going to get so much more out of that rather than focusing on like, hey, like, can I get the body that I want this summer? Can I get to 3 plates this year on the bench press? Things like that. But yeah. I'm still learning, and when it comes to again, like my 3-day experiment that I'm going to do afterwards, like I wouldn't be surprised. And part of me kind of wants to see that, holy crap, you're progressing just as well. Like I kind of want that to happen, so I know I'm going to work really hard on it. And I'm actually, I'm thinking, I'm kind of playing around with the idea. Like I want to make the program public, like just put it out there, because if anyone follows it, it's going to be like, well, like it's so simple, so basic. There's nothing sexy about it. But you'll most likely be able to keep up with it. Like I think, yeah, like that is what a lot of people should like play around with, is just trying to minimize like what their bodybuilding like requires from them in regards to watering. So yeah, I hope I have a lot of people jump on it and they're doing, I don't know, like 30 total sets a week or something like that, because that's what it's going to look like.
Be sweet. Are you doing full body sessions for that, you think?
I don't like full body, so I'm not going to do full body. I can't have fun with full body. Like, RDL, and then I go do a back. Oh, it's kind of that, like, mentally that drains me. So, but it could probably be structured in that way, and it'd probably make a whole lot more sense, I feel.
Yeah, I think you'll enjoy that. I know, like, Ben Howard, great bodybuilder out of the UK.
That's one guy I think about a lot.
He's been training 3 days a week for a while. I mean, and he's at a very advanced. He won worlds, so he won his weight class.
And he's still improving.
Yeah, so that's that's a testament to, the bulk of your progress is going to come from a fairly small amount of work. So just
and I think that's also just great advice, Berto. What's there to lose? You're still training. It's not like you're going to shrink. You're going to be eating. So there's only one place to go, and that's to grow. And I think that's really good advice for folks. Just keep training. What are you going to lose? Nothing. You're probably not going to miss that 10 sets, 12 sets, 15 sets that you end up cutting out. And, like I said, you're not going to lose anything except probably gain all of the stuff that we've talked about in this whole podcast. I think that's really good, parting advice. So, and then just do it and then just stick with it.
Yeah. Like, last thing, I guess, on my end. But, like, remember, we used to tease Jeff, Eric, and I about the whole, like, there's two kinds of people when it comes to crumbs, like, on the kitchen table. There's people who just, like, do that, and he's like, but, to be a good bodybuilder, you have to be the guy that, like, pours him into, and then goes and throws him in the garbage, And I think that sort of thinking, when you're sweating the details in the right way, man, that can go really far. Like, I'm really signing off on, like, the way you do one thing is the way you do a lot of things. And so see, with my training, like, it's like, okay, like, let's make everything have a reason, a purpose. You should be able to, like, write a full essay about, like, your training session afterwards, like, what went right. Okay. That, like, that's what I think, like, good, efficient training that's sustainable, like, should be like you should be able to, like, afterwards, like, go through all your sets and, like, think about what went right, what didn't go well. So yeah, there's been a lot of wrong over the course of my bodybuilding career, but yeah, it's been fun to figure that out, and I'm just trying to get people to not make the same mistakes I made, and trying to get them to not do what I did, because, like, Jeff was there all along, close proximity, and I was like, bro, like, I don't have to do exactly what you're doing, but you can learn, like, the way Jeff curls. It's like, before you go add more sets of curls, it's like, curl like freaking Jeff Alberts, then we can talk about adding more.
That's our job, after all, right? Because we help people not make the same mistakes that we made, and, like you said, trying to trial by error, figure it out by boot camp. Let us take care of that for you. So,
parting remarks, Brian?
No, I think that sums it up well. I think, nothing else to add.
Cool. I'm about to go get my 12 set leg day in. No, thank you for joining us, guys, and hopefully I'll get that thing out there, because I really want to get that program out and get people. This is, like, one thing you can mimic, because it's not going to harm anybody. Yeah. Max OT was maybe not the right program long term, but it definitely cleaned some things up, and hopefully it does that for other folks as well.